The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Women Equalities Select Committee and our inquiry into non-consensual intimate image abuse. Can I thank you this afternoon, Georgia Harrison, for coming to give evidence to us, and the committee members will ask you questions in turn. But starting, could you just tell us in your own words about what has led you to be a campaigner on this issue and what happened in 2020 that's brought you to this place?
So for anyone that isn't aware, back in 2020, an ex-partner of mine filmed us having sex without me knowing. So he had cameras around his garden and also inside his property, and I was not warned of that prior to the sexual intercourse. I was not told until after that actually 20 minutes of the footage had been recorded. I was then assured on that day that it would go no further than those four walls, that the footage would be deleted, and that is the last anyone would know about it. However, further on in that evening, I saw him send that to someone else via WhatsApp. So I then made him retract it, and I explained to him implicitly what would happen if that footage was ever to get into someone else's hands. I explained, is he aware of what revenge porn is? And that if it ever did go anywhere, I would then go on to call the police. I think my only regret in hindsight was not calling the police there and then, but I was hoping that it would never ever go any further than it did that day. 6 months down the line, I was then sent a screenshot of the footage in question from a fan of a TV show we'd both been on, and that fan was located in America. So as soon as I saw that image, I immediately knew that somehow the footage that I'd been told would never ever go anywhere had been spread globally online. I just wasn't aware of how or where it came from. So obviously immediately I then asked this fan, where have you seen this? I was then told that it was on the person in question's verified OnlyFans account, Stephen Bears. But the person then deleted their account, the person that I was speaking with. So I then wasn't sure how to track it down. I wasn't sure how far it had gone. And my first thing was, if I can track down where it's come from, maybe it's not too late to stop too many people from seeing it. So I then went onto my Instagram and I just said, has anyone seen a video of me in said person's garden? If so, can you please send it to the email address that's on my account, which was my agent's details, which was actually my mother at the time. She was my agent at the time. And with that, we had about 100 different people messaging in with evidence of this video, not just from his OnlyFans account at this point. It had been spread to various different platforms. I think Pornhub, Brits XXX, there was multiple different platforms that were hosting this video. And it had already been hosted on the OnlyFans account for, I think, at least a month at that point. So unfortunately, by the time we were made aware that this was circulating on the web, millions of people had seen it, and it then just completely and utterly blew up. It went viral to a point I couldn't explain. My phone was just going off every 2 seconds, whereas people were getting it sent around WhatsApp groups, and this was a link that was just readily available to the public. I think, obviously, it absolutely horrified me that an individual had done this to me. But what most horrified me was that these platforms were hosting this video, which was unconsented. And for many of them, some of them did well, but many of them didn't. And for many that I tried to reach out to, I would get an automated response saying, we'll get back to you within 4 to 6 days. And I was speaking earlier with a metaphor of when something like this is happening, it is really like a house fire. And the quicker you can put it out, the quicker you can stop it. And unfortunately, in 4 to 6 days, your house has burnt down. Everyone knows about this video, your family, your workplace, your peers, and it's just too late. However, if you can get through to someone in the first 24 hours, you then have time to stop this going any further and potentially not ruining your life. But for me, it went as far as you can imagine, to the point where it was global.
And your first recourse was actually to social media, not to the police. Why was that?
I just think because I knew it was on some sort of a platform already, and I had such a big platform, I just think I assumed I could maybe find it before even calling the police.
And when you did go to the police, what sort of response did you get?
I had a very good response from the police. I know not everyone has the same experience, but immediately it was just, we're going to take your statement, we're going to do it from start to finish, and we're going to do everything we can to stop this from happening. But I think their immediate response was that they needed to arrest the man in question. However, he wasn't in the UK at the time, he was in Dubai. So I think they went round his house to look for evidence of the cameras and stuff like that. But it was quite a long time before we could actually get him into custody because he wasn't in the country.
And you said that you were first made aware of it by somebody in the US. Is that one of the big challenges, the global nature of the internet, that legislation in one jurisdiction may not cover others?
I think so. I think it was quite shocking that it took a month for me to even be aware that this footage was circulating online. I think one of the biggest challenges in general is I feel like these big social media companies who are hosting pornographic images and videos, they don't have any way of us getting through to them to report it when there is something unconsented there. And I think it shouldn't be like robots that you're getting through to when it's this important of a situation. It shouldn't be that hard to be able to get through to someone and just say, look, I'm not saying delete it, I'm not saying take this person's account down, I'm just saying can we pause it and then review it in a few weeks. And I think that's the biggest issue that we're dealing with at the moment.
That could give a breathing space for a victim if it could just be instantly paused.
Yeah.
And the tech would exist to do that it would then give people a chance to consider it more carefully.
Yeah, because then they could go back and review it, and if whoever's in it hasn't consented, then obviously it will never go back up. But if actually after review both people have consented, I don't feel there's an issue with that, and then the footage is still there to get put back on the platform. But I think if something gets reported to the level where you say this is me in a sexually explicit act and I have not given permission for it to be on your platform, it should be paused that day. It shouldn't be paused in 4 to 6 days.
And finally, your experience of the criminal justice system, what would you change, or do you feel that it worked for you?
I feel it worked very well for me. I do think it would be good if there is legal support for victims during the process, which is something that I think a lot of MPs have been discussing, because I just think for a lot of young women, you don't have anyone to go to sort of give you advice as you're going through this process, and I think it would be really nice if victims did have help.
Where would you think the advice should come from? Should police forces have a system in place so that there's support for the victim?
Yeah, I think a system in place, or I think what's being proposed is there would be a funding from the government to certain lawyers who could help support victims throughout their process, just to help them understand what their rights are, basically, and to just help them along it, because I think so many of them give up during the process because it's just too much for them, or they're not sure if they're doing or saying the right thing. Sometimes they feel like they're getting victim blamed slightly, and I think if they just had someone to lean on during the process, they wouldn't feel so much like they have to withdraw. They'd have an inner strength in them, and they would know what to do and what to say along the timeline of events. And
the timeline can be really long, so did you ever feel like giving up?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. There was times that I felt like giving up. Like, I felt like, I thought, first of all, I know that I now can't speak throughout this timeline until I get to the court process. So there were so many times I thought, shall I just give up so I can just, speak my truth to the public? But I knew what I was doing I had to push on with no matter what. But there were so many times I did think, have I made the right decision?
And you waived your anonymity. At what personal cost to yourself?
I mean, I really do feel as though my anonymity was removed as soon as the video went up anyway, because everyone I knew, friendship-wise, colleague-wise, family-wise, which is your main concern when something like this happens, were already made aware of the video. So I really do feel like my anonymity didn't really exist. But when I did take the choice to obviously step up and speak about it publicly, yeah, I think I just felt I'd been at such an injustice, not just by the man that done it to me, but by the platforms that used me to make money on their behalf. They literally used this unconsented footage to make money off of me. And I just felt like it was something that I didn't ever want to happen in the future. And I honestly felt so like my voice didn't matter as an individual. It wasn't until people realised that potentially I had a platform that they made the necessary moves to take the footage down. But so many women I've spoken to just get ignored by these people. And I just felt like I needed to stand up and make some form of a change to help support others in the future.
Kate.
Thanks, Chair. Georgia, can I just echo what the Chair said, and thank you personally for coming in today, for spending so much time talking to the MPs about your case and the wider issues and the urgent legislation change that we need around this. I think we're also impressed by your resilience and your bravery in sharing your story in order to help so many others. Can I start by asking you how the case impacted you personally, both emotionally and physically?
I think it impacted me in like every way you could imagine. So I always like sort of compare it to grief. I think you have to actually grieve a form of version of yourself. You feel like you lose your dignity. You feel like you lose a lot of pride. There's so much shame involved in it. And for the first few days, I was really just going through waves of complete like sorrow and shock. And just, it got to the point where I was so emotionally affected by what happened to me that I ended up being physically ill as well, to the point where I was in hospital for like 5 days over Christmas, a little bit after the incident, because the stress took such an effect on my body that I ended up having a cyst burst and I got an infection. And literally it was just like my body deteriorated with my emotions. This also obviously had a huge knock-on effect on my career, because I went from just a normal girl who works in television to someone who is now effectively in the porn industry, even though that was something I never ever wanted to be involved in. I always wanted to be a presenter, and for about 2 years so many brands retracted from working with me, and it got to the point where I had to move out of my home and move back in with my mother for 2 years. Love you, Mum, but it wasn't the plan at 27, you know. So financially it took a massive hit to me, but emotionally it took away a lot of my innocence, and it changed the way that I value myself as a person, because now I know whenever I'm dating, meeting new people, going into any sort of a new work opportunity, I am known as the person who has this sex tape, which I never ever filmed and never consented to be out there. So it changed a lot for me, and it definitely gives me a lot of fear for one day, if I do have a family, which is something that was always my intention, are my children going to be able to stumble across this footage because I'm not protected in the right way by the government for that not to be an issue right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And if we can just touch a bit more on your professional career. I know that shamefully some brands dropped you as their ambassador. Just wondering, was there any attempt by them to acknowledge that you'd been a victim of a crime?
No, so like if you looked at my earnings before it happened and then after, the drop was just completely drastic. But the majority of them obviously didn't want to admit that the reason that they didn't want to work with me was because of this issue, especially at that time prior to my name being cleared. So things definitely turned around once I had the court case and I got the guilty verdict. But prior to that, people just wanted to wash their hands of me. They weren't sure if I had some form of involvement in the video. And I think either way, there were plenty of people that had the same following as me or the same thing to offer. And I just became someone that was a red flag. So, yeah, many of them just sort of acted like they didn't want to rebook me. But a few people said to my agent, sort of like off the books, that obviously a lot of the reason that they done it was because of the video. And I'll never get my connection back with the majority of those brands. But, you know, I'm building new connections with brands that really do stand up for women, and they believe in targeting and tackling violence against women and girls. And, you know, they're the sort of brands that I want to be working with now. But for about 2 years, I couldn't get any work whatsoever because of it.
And post the case, did any of those brands come back to you? In any way to, I don't know, whether, if not to apologise, at least to acknowledge that you had been a victim and that maybe they hadn't acted in the best way?
Not really. I don't think any of them really wanted to admit that the reason they stopped working with me was because of that. So to come back to me now and apologise would be taking accountability. Some of them I do work with again now because I can understand that potentially maybe I was just a flight risk at the time. But some of them I'll never work with again just because, you know, I'm very much aware that they dropped me in my time of need.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's understandable.
Yeah.
When we were talking earlier, you were telling me about how many young girls or women approach you all the time, I think you said, certainly very often, to tell you about themselves being in a similar situation. So can you tell me a bit more about how many people have contacted you directly since you spoke out about your experience and how you deal with that, you know, with someone who's in a similar situation, and what you say to them when they're looking for advice?
Altogether, I would say thousands. Like when it was at the peak of what happened, I was getting just a complete influx that I couldn't even keep up with. But to this date, bearing in mind we're about 3 years later, I still would say I get about 5 to 6 messages a day from either a victim or a victim's family, usually just asking for help, detailing what they've been through. It does tend to be around image-based sexual abuse, but I feel like it's more now a broader scope where it can be domestic abuse, people that have been sexually assaulted, rape victims, and I usually just do my best to direct them to whatever charity I feel can help them the most. When it comes to image-based sexual abuse, I'll always give them like some form of advice, reassurance, a little bit of guidance on hopefully things can get better for you and will, but I will then pass them over to the revenge porn helpline who can then help them from there. So I dread to imagine how many people they get sent through via me, let alone in general, as I think like when you do Google for help in image-based sexual abuse, the first thing that does come up is that charity. But I can definitely assure you that the statistics in no way will truly reflect just how much of an issue this is in society, because so many women do not come forward. They just do their best to live with it if they can. So, yeah.
And I mean, I'm shocked by the fact that you say thousands, and like you say, you know, so many others must be out there that are dealing with this. You did brilliantly campaigning for managing to get the requirement to prove intention to cause distress in intimate image abuse cases to be repealed. The loopholes in existing law means that thousands of websites containing intimate image abuse material cannot be removed from the internet, resulting in the victimisation of so many once again. So what more in your view, needs to be done to support victims of non-consensual intimate image abuse?
So I think, obviously, as someone that's experienced the court process, it is a really, really hard thing to go through. So to go through all of that journey to actually, you know, prove in a courtroom that, in fact, you were a victim of image-based sexual abuse, that whoever's targeted you had done this without your consent. It's one thing to see them go to prison, and it's a brilliant thing, don't get me wrong, but it almost feels like a kick in the teeth that you can go through that entire process and then at the end of it the government say, oh, but by the way, we're not going to make this imagery or these videos illegal. Like, they are still legal to be shared online, but you've actually proven that you did not give your consent to have them filmed. They're all of a sexually explicit nature, and the only way to make things quite frankly make sense is that at the end of a successful court case, that footage should then be deemed illegal, and then it will be so much easier for us to get that removed from these platforms. It won't just be easier for the charities trying to get it removed, it will be easier for the platforms that have to remove it, because for them, they're also in a situation where if the footage isn't proven as illegal, do they even have the right to remove it?
So as a legislator, it seems clear to me what we need to do to put these protections in place. What do you think, what else can the platforms do?
I think the best things that the platforms can do is have some form of a 24/7 phone line where you can get through and speak to a human about what you're going through. I just think when you look at, like, you know, any other sort of service, Vodafone, BT, if I've got something wrong with my Wi-Fi, I can get someone on the phone any time of day. So how is it possible that these platforms that are making billions a year, not even millions, billions, can't have some sort of a compliance phone line where you can call them up and say, look, this is an unconsented video. It's so important that you do something about this. And someone goes, okay, I hear what you're saying, we're on it. It would make such a difference to victims out there, and they wouldn't feel unheard, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're drowning and no one's available to answer the phone.
Thank you so much, Chair.
You just used a really interesting phrase, prior to my name being cleared. Did you feel like the one on trial?
I think at times you do. I think there's always some element of, like when I was actually having to give evidence, I just remember thinking like, why did I put myself in that situation? But like, I could never have seen that situation coming. But when I was on the stand, I definitely felt at times like I was being accused of putting myself in that scenario, and maybe in a way that I deserved what happened to happen to me.
Belle.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Georgia, for speaking. I think it's so important that you've taken the time to do this and that you're campaigning on these issues. I want to go back to some of the things that you'd already said. You were talking about some sort of mechanism for proof of consent before it being published on the various different social media platforms. Some sort of a pause. Do you think it would be too much for a social media company, once somebody uploads something like that, to pause it immediately and then require explicit evidence of consent before moving forward with publishing it more widely?
So I'm not too sure about how all of these platforms work, because it's not something that I work in myself. But what I've been made aware of is that some platforms are implementing an algorithm where basically if you were to own the account, obviously you have to give some sort of a passport or identification to say this is your account. So you can then upload videos of you, but then they have an algorithm which can detect if there's another human being in the videos. So a little bit like when we're on our photos, you can type in mum and all your pictures of your mum will come up. It knows that that's your mum, and it knows if there's someone else next to it. So if there is another individual in the videos, this algorithm can then say, you know, this person hasn't consented to being in this footage, therefore it won't make it to the platform. However, all they have to do is upload their identification as well alongside the account owner and sign something saying, I give permission to be in this video. Something like that would prevent so much unconsented footage making it to these platforms, and the technology is out there, so why are they not putting it on their platforms?
And do you have any, it sounds like this is something that you've spoken about before, this particular process. Have you ever spoken about this perhaps to a social media company and then responded about why this would or wouldn't work?
No, it's just something I've been made aware of that other platforms are using. Okay. So I don't understand why they're not all doing it. And like, for instance, as someone who does TikTok, if you were to upload a video on TikTok and it's in like your underwear or something, it gets screened and it won't usually make it to the platform. I'm sure certain things get through, but they have the technology in place to make sure that certain things aren't being uploaded to their platforms. I'm sure if you're running a platform that does facilitate pornography, it's different, but they do have means of making sure that that basically everyone in there has consented. So why are they not doing that?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I want to take you back to your court case as well, because you talked about getting a guilty verdict, and you've also talked about your loss of earnings, issues of reputation, etc. And I just wanted to be clear as to what the court case actually gave you, so that we know, I suppose, when other people go through this process or have taken it that far, what kind of either compensation or what they are allowed to do once they get said guilty verdict. So the guilty verdict was against your ex-partner.
Yeah.
And following on from that, because you could prove that he uploaded these things without your consent, was he then required to pay you any sort of compensation?
So he was required to pay back the money that he earned off the video to the state. I don't want to say an exact number, I think it was around 27. So basically whatever he earned off of it didn't go to me, it went back to the state. But I was then awarded £5,000 in compensation. I think that was more for the trauma that I had to experience as a result of what he'd done, rather than me actually getting awarded the money that he made off of it. However, today I haven't received a penny off of him, but that's technically what should be happening.
Yeah. And there were no moves to, let's say, reward you or compensate you for the loss of earnings. I suppose everything that would have contributed to not being able to book certain jobs afterwards, etc.
And that was something that I had to pursue via a civil lawyer. And I did win that. However, I've also not received any money from that. But I was very lucky to have a lawyer that was happy to do it, no win, no fee. Whereas a lot of victims obviously won't be able to do that, and they would never be able to afford anyone to look after them in a civil courtroom, because, you know, the costs really, really do rack up. So technically, no, there isn't really much compensation for a victim if they are to follow this through on a court case.
Okay, thank you very much. And you also talked about victim blaming. I just want to go into that in a bit more detail. We hear evidence on a range of different issues, and a lot of the time, particularly when it comes to women in particular, women are blamed for a lot of the situations that they find themselves in. I know, obviously, you've felt like you were blamed at some point, and you would have spoken to a lot of women who experienced the same thing. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, for the other victims I speak to, so many of them do go through these issues, and I feel that when I took the stand, from his defence side, it was very much, I think they were trying to sort of spin the narrative that I was in love with him and I'd orchestrated somehow this whole issue to get back at him, and that was very much what they were trying to go with when I was on the stand. So there was an element of definitely of victim blaming and trying to spin it on me, but I always knew that's something I was going to walk into, and I just had to stay strong throughout and just keep speaking my truth. But I've always said before, like, I am a very confident individual, and I have spoken in public before, but I still found the whole process excruciating. So for like a victim that's a lot shyer or, you know, slightly more timid, I think it's near impossible to get through taking that stand sometimes. So I really think it's important that people are safeguarded against victim blaming, and I think it's nice that at this point they're starting to give victims the option to do it via a Zoom link, because maybe that will give them the space to be able to deliver their story properly and with truth without feeling too emotional, because it is a hard scenario. And yeah, I did have to deal with a lot of victim blaming throughout.
Okay. And I know, obviously, your particular situation being filmed, you didn't consent to this. On other occasions, we know that women sometimes may send an image under the expectation that it's not going to be shared, or may, I don't know, record themselves again under the expectation that it would be something that was kept within their partnership. And it has been said that women undergo a lot of victim blaming for things such as that. Has that been your experience from people that you've spoken to?
Yeah, and it really does break my heart. I think, like, so many women are like, they feel like they've done something wrong because at the time they consented to the image or the video being taken. But if you have an agreement that it's being kept in the privacy between you two, that is how it should be kept. And if it's being shared without your permission, it's still a law break, and you have every single right to still pursue justice. And I think some women don't even want to come forward because they feel like they almost deserved it because they gave permission, which is obscene, and they should always take them steps to come forward. But I've definitely spoke to some victims who, in their experience with the police, feel that they were judged because they allowed the video or picture to be taken, and there should be no element of judgment for that, because that is not breaking law. The only thing that's breaking the law is sharing it without consent. And it's definitely important that police are aware of that. Like, if women come to them, they shouldn't be like, you know, or did you let them take it? That shouldn't be a problem, and you shouldn't be judged for that. It's not an issue.
Thank you very much, Georgia.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Kirsten.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I can take you a little bit further down that road, because I think it's a really important issue in terms of the way that the police, you know, other authorities, parts of officialdom deal with this notion of victim blaming that you've spoken very eloquently about. Do you think that there's a need for more awareness raising, more training on these points that you've made about where, you know, things are illegal and where they're absolutely not illegal?
Yeah, definitely. I've always been very honest about I had a great experience with the police and I felt they handled my case very well. But when I speak to other victims, a lot of them do feel that people don't take it seriously. And I think a lot of people just don't understand the emotional trauma and damage that something like this actually does to an individual's life. So I think it would be really good if the police force did go through certain training to just bring awareness to how life-changing this sort of a crime is, and definitely, not blaming the victim whatsoever.
I wonder if you think that might give people more confidence to come forward as well, because I've heard what you said today about the very large number of people who have come to you and who've spoken to you, and I'm sure that there are many people who've come to no one and are sitting at home very worried about this and worried about what it might mean. Do you think that and, you know, other things that, you know, you might be able to suggest would make women feel more empowered to come forward in these situations, because, you know, the support would be there?
Yeah, I think anyone that's dealing with someone who's reporting this sort of an issue really needs to be aware of just how much shame is surrounded in this sort of a crime. It's just a natural emotion that comes when something like this happens, and at times, like, you almost do blame yourself. So it's really important that the victim can come forward almost immediately after the crime. So it's very important that police are aware that when they are coming to them, they're still going to be feeling such an array of emotions, you know, shame, blame, all of these things. So it's important that they don't say anything that can trigger them at that point, because I think that is where they will then feel like they need to retract. So if someone did have training on how to handle this emotion, what to say and what not to, I think more people would proceed forward with their claim.
Thank you for that. And you sounded to me very expert when you were talking earlier about all the things that you'd had to do. You were looking for, you know, evidence, if you like, of what had happened. You talked about the different platforms and so on. You've essentially had to become a bit of an expert in this field, which is, you know, something that you wouldn't have anticipated having to do. And you talked about the impact on your job. It's, I think, going to be very worrying for any woman finding herself in this situation. The job issue, that's not something that's unique to you. And it does strike me a lot of women will have to go digging themselves to try and find, you know, the answers in terms of what to do next and what might happen. I just wonder if you're able to share any further thoughts on that, because I think it's a big concern for people who find themselves in this issue.
Yeah, I think, look, not lucky, but for a long time my career was paused. But I am lucky that the career that I'm in is slightly forgiving, and I've managed to get that back on track. But if you were, say, a politician, a teacher, there's so many careers where actually after something like this happens to you, there would be no going back for you. And it is so important to be aware of that, because that's how devastating this is to your life. And I always say to any victims going through it, my only point of contact is the Revenge Porn Helpline or any of the charities out there, because not only can they give you support in terms of therapy and in terms of advice, but they can try and track this imagery down and get it back before your employer finds out about it or your family finds out about it. But the only people that are there helping these victims right now are the RP Helpline. It's literally all there is. And they're not a big team, so...
No. Thank you so much for all of that. Thank you, Chair.
Elliot, did you have any questions?
No, that was very thorough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Georgia, just one final question, and it's around content. How big a difference would it make if the content was deemed to be illegal once there was a conviction?
Well, it would make every single bit of difference. Like, at the moment, I think there's almost 30,000 images and pictures that the RP Helpline have already said have gone through the court case, they've won, so they're technically illegal, but they're still legal right now. With the changes to the online safety bill, it means that platforms actually now do have to take accountability. So the right legislation's already there in place for if it was illegal to literally just take it down, but we just need someone to say this content is now illegal. And by next week, it would have changed tens of thousands of women's lives who are all sitting there waiting right now for someone to say it's illegal, just so all of that can go down and they can sleep at night. And for me, it would mean that I know I have a future, knowing full well that no one's ever going to be able to find or see that video of me again, as they shouldn't. But until this gets made illegal, that's not going to happen.
Thank you very much. If there is anything that you wish to add in writing after this session, please do. On behalf of all of the committee, can I thank you for being brave enough to come and speak to us today and speaking out on behalf of probably hundreds of thousands of women. Order, order.
Thank you.
So we now have to suspend.
Is currently suspended. The proceeding 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 is currently suspended.
Our panellists for this second panel in our inquiry into intimate image abuse. We have Keily Blair, the Chief Executive Officer of OnlyFans, and David Wright, the Chief Executive of SWGfL and Director of the UKSIC Internet Centre. Committee members will ask you questions in turn. If at any point you haven't had a question addressed to you and you wish to come in, then please do indicate and I'll bring you in at an appropriate moment. Kirsten.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder, David, if I can start with you. I wonder if you could start by explaining for the committee how the stopnc2.org hashtag tool actually works.
Indeed. So, firstly, thank you for the invitation. I'm coming to talk to you. I'm CEO of a charity, SWGfL, and we operate the revenge porn helpline that we've heard so eloquently from Georgia. And I do want to pause for a moment just to pay tribute to Georgia's contribution, the courage that she needs to come forward to that on behalf of thousands, Chair, as you say, thousands and thousands of many others as well. So we've operated the Revenge Porn Helpline since 2015. We support adults who are victims of non-consensual intimate image abuse, and that was the first of its kind in the world. And I'll come on a bit later on to talk perhaps about some of the changes that we've seen. But one of the things that we have, as you've said, we created was stopncii.org. So this is a platform that supports any adult who's having been threatened with having their intimate images posted online. It was launched in December 2021, and the way it works is that, say, you are being threatened, any adult globally, you visit the website, on your device, you create what's called a hash, so a digital fingerprint that uniquely identifies the image or video that you have on your device. It's important to say the victim, the individual, never shares their image. It never leaves their device. It's the hash code. So digital fingerprint then gets added onto the data set, the Stop NCI data set, and we then distribute that to participating platforms as a signal to enable them to prevent that image or that video from being posted on their platform. Today, there's 10 platforms that take the hashes. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Bumble, Reddit, OnlyFans, Snapchat, Niantic, and Threads. So enable them to prevent, say, anybody else anywhere in the world from posting that image. So it discharges the threat that we've heard Georgia describe that they experience. So massively powerful technology. I will just say, so it operated in December. We started in December 2021. And today, or as of last week, there's nearly 700,000 images and videos that Stop NCI is now protecting across 278,000 different cases, and can see that it's happened. It's been enacted, and at least over 15,000 times. So it's worked over 15,000 times over that period to prevent that content from being posted, which I personally take on behalf of the charity as huge success on behalf of those individuals, because otherwise it would have been posted online.
Thank you for that. And I know that NCII.org merged with a pilot run by Meta in 2021. Can you tell me why you decided to partner with Meta?
So yes, it is a reincarnation of what is a Meta project from 2017 called Not Without My Consent. So where they essentially created the idea, there were some subtle differences. It was just Facebook at the time, and you could upload your image to Facebook. They would then create a hash and prevent anyone else from uploading it. But that was uniquely to Facebook, and some of the media coverage was not particularly conducive. So it happened 6 months after Cambridge Analytica story, and you need a lot of trust to upload your previously unshared intimate image to a platform. So Meta then, we then worked with Meta for over a 2-year period, and Stop NCII. So again, StopNCII.org and the development of it is testimony and tribute to Meta for supporting the development of that platform where we are today.
And what happens when a new industry partner signs up to accept the hashes?
So we're expending a lot of effort at the moment as a charity trying to engage more and more. So we have 10 platforms, including OnlyFans, that I've kind of talked about, but we need thousands. The more platforms that we can get taking the hashes, the more harm that we can prevent and the distress that we can prevent that people experience immediately.
Thank you for that. And Keily, if I can come on to you, can you tell us what made OnlyFans decide to partner this way and to start receiving these hashes?
Absolutely, and thank you to the committee for inviting me here today. The work you're doing here is incredibly important, and I just wanted to also thank Georgia. Listening to her story, it's hard not to be horrified actually by her experience, so I'm pleased that we're all here to try and help prevent further victims. And that's very much the reason why, actually, at OnlyFans, we decided to partner with Stop NCII. For us, the issue of consent is so important to being able to exist as a platform. We're an inclusive platform for adults over 18, some of whom choose to share explicit images, and so the idea of express written consent for anybody being able to share those images is incredibly important. We chose to partner with Stop NCII, frankly, because I think the technology is groundbreaking in terms of what it's capable of achieving, as long as we get platform-wide adoption. 10 platforms should only be the beginning of this project. And the more platforms are involved, the more people like Georgia we can all help to protect, and we can stop that proliferation across other platforms. One of the things about OnlyFans is because of the paywall, things stay behind the paywall a lot of the time. That's not the case in the open internet. And so the proliferation that Georgia spoke about, yes, one platform may well take it down, but what happens about the next platform or the next platform or the next platform? That will be solved by a legislative change in the way that you spoke about earlier on, but also the adoption of world-class technology like Stop NCII have in place.
Can you tell me how many hashes OnlyFans has acted on so far?
Sure. So in terms of positive matches, there have been 65 positive matches on OnlyFans out of the 15,000 that David mentioned. That's 65 people from who otherwise would have ended up in Georgia's position, who we were able to prevent from having their images uploaded. So that's just in relation to positive matches on the platform. We also receive additional reporting from the Revenge Porn Helpline outside the Stop NCII platform. And for us, one of the issues that Georgia raised was about the fact that people wait, a lot of platforms need to wait for somebody to say this image is illegal. For us, we don't wait. All we need is somebody to tell us, this is an image of me, and we will take it down if they don't consent to it being up, whether it's explicit or non-explicit. Consent is a must-have for our platform.
Thank you for that. David, can I come back to you? You've spoken about the numbers of platforms who you're dealing with, and I wonder if you're aware that we recently wrote to 16 tech companies and social media platforms to ask why they don't currently partner with Stop NCII. I wonder what you make of the responses that we received.
Yeah, so again, I very much thank the committee for doing that. So the responses, so firstly, it has actually sparked a number of conversations and a number of engagements. So that's testimony to the engagement that you've affected. I do note that there are a number of platforms in terms of the responses as well that would suggest they're not in a position to use Stop NCI hashes now. A couple talk about they already have technologies to identify and prevent nudity or sexually explicit content. For us, non-consensual intimate image abuse is a very precise term, and it doesn't have to include nudity. So intimacy is much more of a term that we would recognise and we would work with. In many parts, many countries in the world, in many cultures, and many religious, content doesn't have to be sexually explicit to have the same catastrophic effect on individuals, on victims' lives. So for us, having sexually explicit filters is not the same as working with Stop NCI. So again, we work and would point that out to many platforms, and it acts as a signal that would then supplement whenever they're operating and receiving images or video on their platforms.
So thinking about Google and Microsoft, for instance, they've not implemented the hashing technology on their platforms. Is that something you think that they could do? In the spirit of keeping answers short, yes. Yes, okay. And Keely, did OnlyFans have any issues or difficulties in joining this initiative?
So in terms of the timeline from when we signed contracts to when we were able to implement, again, I'm going to try and be short. So we started the implementation in January. We finished the first phase of the implementation the same month. It took approximately 80 hours of tech and engineering time to be able to fully integrate phase 1. Phase 2 was implementing the feedback loop, which is enabling us to actually provide feedback to Stop NCII about hash matches and things on there. So that took a little bit more time, that was more complex, and that was fully implemented by the end of March. In terms of monthly maintenance hours, I would say between 4 and 5 hours a month, typically, in terms of dev and tech time. A little bit of legal advice from time to time comes into things when there's contracting to do, but it's not an overly onerous process.
And so why do you think then that some platforms are reluctant to start receiving hashes from NCII?
It's very hard for me to comment on other platforms and what they may be experiencing. All I can say is that for us, it was absolutely worth the time, and I would have spent double the amount of time to be able to implement it because of the effectiveness of the technology in protecting victims. So.
Thank you. David, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think so. Some of the answers to that particular question may be illuminated in some of the responses from, and again, I'm going to reiterate perhaps a confusion between sexually explicit content and intimate image abuse. And for me, so that we're just trying to find some clarity around very much the distinction between those two.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Keely, can I just take you back and ask you to be really explicit in explaining this to us? So,
of course.
Consent is a must-have. That's the phrase you used. Can I just clarify? You require, if somebody uploads content to your site that there's more than one person in, do you require consent from all people in that image or video before it ever goes live?
We do now, essentially. We've evolved our processes over time, and in November 2022, we changed our processes to require that consent to be expressly given to OnlyFans before the content goes live. Previously, all creators had the obligation to obtain that consent and for that consent to be explicit and written, but it wasn't required to be provided to us for us to verify before the content went live. So there's been a change. Now it is, yes.
Thank you for that. And can you explain the phrase that you used, that your content is behind a paywall? I get that. And so effectively it's trapped behind a paywall. If I'm a bad actor, how do I get it out from behind the paywall and put it on a different site? And how easy is that?
Yeah, no, so I think it might be helpful if I actually explain. It seems like you know very well how the platform works, but some people may not understand the difference between creators and fans on the platform. So to be a creator on OnlyFans, you have to go through quite a strict onboarding process. So you provide your name, your date of birth, government-issued ID, copy of your selfie, essentially, social security number, tax details, bank account details, in order to open an account to be able to create and monetize content. So we know ultimately who all the creators are on our platform. But the content belongs to the creator. So if an individual chooses to share content on our platform, they may also choose to share it on other platforms simultaneously. The content on our platform is behind a paywall. You can't record it if Creator is turned on DRM, for example, which is an open source technology that Netflix and other websites use to prevent you from, if you've ever tried to screenshot a Netflix thing, you just get a black box, essentially. We have that technology in place to prevent people from taking material off the platform. But bad actors tend to try and use multiple platforms to try and get things out there. So for us, it's enabling people, when they report things to us, for it to be taken down very swiftly. So Georgia referred, obviously, to a 24/7 helpline. We have a 24/7 response line that deals with any high priority reports. That includes intimate image abuse, for example. So things will be dealt with and responded to extremely quickly.
And just a question for David quickly. Some of the other platforms, so if I go specifically, let's name names because I've got privilege here and I can. Pinterest and Match have argued that their existing systems are already sufficiently robust. Could you just outline how they're not?
From recollection, so the Pinterest response talks about that they already have sexually explicit filters for sexually explicit content. Again, I'm going to make the point that content does not have to be explicit for it to be intimate image content can be the same catastrophic impact as a sexually explicit. So that's where I think I would return back to. A response that I think so Match said is that you can't you're not able to upload content to their platform. Okay. I think there are other aspects in terms where we have seen some particularly sort of abuse that emanates from those sorts of platforms. So it's about, again, trying to prevent that sort of content, signposting people as a minimum to, if they are a victim of NCII, then where they can go and get help immediately, as kind of Keely said about 24-hour response is what's needed.
And Keely, sorry, you said quickly. How quickly?
So, for example, in Georgia's case, the content was taken down 24 hours and 18 minutes after she reported it to the platform. We aim to action it as soon as possible. So as soon as somebody makes a report, it's taken down immediately, rather than, can we get proof? Can we get this? Can we get that? We take people at their word. If they say, I don't consent to this image being up there, we will remove the content. It will also trigger a full review of the account in question to see if there's any other concerns regarding the account.
Okay, so if I'm an 18-year-old girl with a non-consensual intimate image, 24 hours might seem like a lifetime.
Yes.
If I'm somebody with no profile, 18-year-old student, do I get a 24-hour service?
Yes. It's the same for everybody.
David?
Can I just add on to that? So a bit more sort of numbers here. So stopnci.org works instantly as kind of a technology interface. It doesn't require the reporting because it's all it's an instant and an immediate and a continuous support. From the revenge porn helpline perspective, in the last 4 years, so we have reported 114 images to OnlyFans, and the content was then immediately taken down and then reviewed. That's uncommon in our experience. So normally we make a report and then content is reviewed in terms of in a queue, and then action is taken, which we would like to see everyone, all platforms have take the content down first, then review.
Thank you. Kate?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you both for coming today. David, can you explain how some non-consensual intimate image content can remain on the internet and accessible in the UK even when it has been proven to be non-consensual?
Indeed. So we've seen advances from the Online Safety Act, and I think so. We firstly welcome the Online Safety Act and the reduction in terms of the bar to some form of offence. So no longer you have to prove intent, for example. So we very much welcome that. The content, though, or the offence is all about sharing and the intent to share. It's not about the content. So yes, platforms have an obligation to remove content, but if the content's not removed, and I'm going to give you an example. We supported the National Crime Agency over a 2-year, 18-month period up until 2021. One particular perpetrator was extorting women and girls for images. So we set about trying to find the victims who were women. The Internet Watch Foundation tried to find the victims who were girls. So we found 200 victims of this one perpetrator, and we reported over 160,000 images that he'd extorted of these women. We had 147,000 removed. There's a residual of 15,000 images online that we're not able to take down. So we approached, with the Internet Watch Foundation, we approached internet service providers to see if we could block access, as we routinely do with other illegal content, and the response that we got was no. The content is not illegal. We are not allowed to be blocking access to to legal content. So that's why we have a particular, and that's why we're here, I think. I do note on Sunday in the Sunday Express there was an article about ahead of today, and the government's response, or a spokesperson for the government who said, if I may quote, so the Online Safety Act will require sites, when they say sites I presume they mean internet service providers, but it's not particularly clear, to block access to websites hosting illegal non-consensual intimate images if ordered by a court via Ofcom powers. We're perplexed by this statement because the Online Safety Act does not, and this is first and foremost, does not deem non-consensual intimate images as illegal. So we're rather confused. Yes, Ofcom will have more powers, so they will have service restriction orders that they can impose, so to do with payment gateways. They can then, if those fail, they can then also serve, or they will be able to serve, service access or service restriction orders to block access to content. I would suggest this is wholly inadequate, given the length of time. We've already heard 24 hours is a lot can happen in 24 hours, but this is going to be months. So that's how content can stay online. 90% of the content the Revenge Porn Helpline reports gets taken down. We've reported over 330,000 images. We've had 300,000 removed. There's 30,000 images online that we know is NCI, 15,000 of which, and including Georgia's content, remain online, typically in countries where they have no interest. They may be hosting this content specifically to generate traffic from different countries, typically Russia, from Latin America, where we have no control. And when they're not going to respond to us. Other regulators around the world only have a 90% takedown rate too. We can't expect 100% of platforms to remove content. We need other mechanisms to be able to block access to this content, to stop the re-victimisation that Georgia powerfully talked about.
So from what you're saying, it would make a difference if adult non-consensual intimate images were classed as illegal content in the same way as, say, child sexual abuse material is. Would there be any unintended consequences if NCII content was treated in the same way as child sexual abuse material?
So that would be an enormous leap, I think. So enormous progress to be able to get to that point, to be able to actually give victims, again, you heard from Georgia about the re-victimisation where content is posted online, where it exists in countries beyond our jurisdiction. So applying the same sorts of approach, the same sorts of legislation would be able to serve exactly that particular purpose. And so the effectiveness of that, we've got many years' experience of managing, of restricting, of taking down child sexual abuse content within the Internet Watch Foundation and the National Crime Agency. We're just going to mirror that. We just need to mirror that.
Okay, thank you. Keily, if I can ask you, how would OnlyFans deal with child sexual abuse material if it were found to be hosted on your platform? Are you able to proactively take it down, or is it reactive?
So there's a couple of ways in which we deal with that material. So as I mentioned earlier on, we have a very strict identity and age age verification process for creators before they're able to join the platform. So start off by making the environment hostile and difficult for people to be able to share that material in the first place. Then in the event that people do choose to share that material, even though we're a UK-based platform, we choose to voluntarily report to NCMEC, the National Centre for the Exploited and Missing Children, based in the US. That's a global clearinghouse for CSAM material. So if we identify anybody who's attempted to share CSAM on our platform, not even successfully, but even attempted and been blocked from sharing it, because again, we take the NCMEC hash, much like we do Stop NCII's hash as well, we report those images to NCMEC. To give you a sense of context in terms of numbers, last year in 2023, we reported 347 attempts or postings of CSAM material on OnlyFans. By contrast, one of the other social media platforms posted 30 million reports to NCMEC. So it gives you a sense of actually creating a hostile environment in the beginning, making sure that you know the age and identity of the people who are posting information, because that drives accountability. If you have accountability and you can say, I can see who posted that, I can provide that information to NCMEC, then the reports become actionable, then things can change. You asked about unintended consequences. I do think one of the difficulties about CSAM versus NCII is the classification of it in terms of legality. For my sins, I'm a lawyer by background, so I go back to that as being where I think about things too. NCII content is not per se illegal in this country, and it's definitely not per se illegal in lots of jurisdictions. So whilst platforms like us choose to take consent very seriously and will take it down, others choose to hide behind legal definitions to keep content up. So that could be one of the challenges in terms of implementing a system, but it's not an unsurmountable challenge either, so it's worthwhile doing.
Thank you. And can I just ask you mentioned before about consent with regards to your platform. If consent is given but then withdrawn, is that dealt with in the same way?
Yes. As soon as if somebody contacts us and says, I previously consented to my image being on the platform, I withdraw that consent, we will immediately take that image down. No questions asked.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Elliot.
Thank you, Chair. Keily, if I could start with you and ask what conversations you've had with Ofcom regarding the new Online Safety Act regulations, specifically when we're talking here about NCII.
So we're already regulated by Ofcom under the video sharing platforms regime, and we have an ongoing supervisory relationship with them. We haven't had a great deal of interaction with them so far about NCII in particular. As you've seen from the most recently published Code of Conduct, the focus has been very much on other issues rather than about NCII. We'd be very happy to talk to Ofcom further about the steps that we take. They know the steps that we take to prevent NCII, but also to advocate for actually greater powers. And I do think that the recourse of having to seek a court order to take something down is, it's beyond most people in terms of expense, time, effectiveness, all of those other things. So I would echo the comments that David made around the inadequacy of that as a provision.
And yeah, David, to pick up on that point, regarding Ofcom's guidance on how platforms should deal with NCII, is it too reliant on voluntary action? Could it be strengthened? Could it go further?
So we were, like everybody, we spent a lot of time responding to Ofcom's consultation. The bulk, clearly, the legal harms consultation was around child abuse content, as kind of Keely said, which is to be expected. But NCII kind of appears, but as a secondary, perhaps third particular content. So yes, again, in particularly short. I think I'll add just in terms of strengthening that position as well. So the Revenge Porn Helpline, we've seen a huge surge or growth in the number of cases that we're managing. So to give you an idea, in 2019 we managed 1,600 cases. That doubled in 2020, we think fueled by COVID, to 3,200, then to 4,400 in 21, 8,900 in 22, and then last year we only published this data yesterday. Last year was just under 19,000 cases. So we've seen a tenfold increase in 4 years. Now, a number of instances have happened. Not least, we saw in March last year, which we don't know, but we can only attribute to Georgia's case. That resulted in an increase. Again, I want to pay tribute here. So Georgia giving courage to others in that situation to step forward and to reach out for help. but all then contributed to that dramatic rise that we continue to see. So do the codes go far enough? No, they don't, but we're anticipating that will change once the child sex abuse material, as well as terrorist content, usually then NCI, will follow. But I will just add, as time goes by, more victims are feeling harm.
Thank you. And just to finish up on the Online Safety Act, Keely, are you confident that OnlyFans has already moved to meet the new requirements that are coming in under that Act, or do you still think you've got areas to go to update policies to be in compliance?
I'm confident that we have in place the necessary measures to meet our obligations under that Act. That will always continue to evolve. Harms change, the threats shift. It's important that we as platforms don't remain static and we continue to look at what we can do that's better, find new technology that's out there, work with charities, work with government. But also platforms don't need to wait for legislation to do that, and that's probably one of the things I would say is really important, and highlighting the incredible work that the Revenge Porn Helpline do, that Stop NCII do, that NICMIC do. There's so much more that platforms can voluntarily choose to do without waiting to be dragged there.
We're about to be disturbed in a minute, but I'll take my chances and ask the next one. You've already mentioned your changes in your verification procedures in 2022 and what that means, the difference between a creator and a fan. But there we go.
So look, I don't know how many... Order, I have to suspend the meeting. I'll do that bit first. I don't know how many divisions we're going to have. Okay. I will keep...
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
And welcome to the resumption of our session this afternoon on intimate image abuse. We'll go straight back to where we left off. Elliot.
Thank you. So, Keely, I'll repeat from where we left off. So you've already explained earlier in the session about the 2022 changes to your verification procedures. Have you noticed any tangible impact that that's had on the number of complaints of NCII that you've received as an organisation?
Sure. I mean, I think when we look at complaints about NCII, they come in various different forms. The best way to look at complaints from our perspective is actually to think about the complaints we receive from law enforcement, because we action any user complaints already, but law enforcement requires sometimes further investigation. So, for example, this year we have received, since January 2023, there have been 22 UK-based law enforcement inquiries about NCII in general. We investigated all of those and actually only confirmed 3 cases were actually NCII images that had appeared on the platform. So there is a measurable drop in terms of actual confirmed cases. But as I've mentioned earlier on, all we need is somebody to say to us, I don't consent to this being on the platform, we won't wait for law enforcement to take action or for someone to be prosecuted. So we have seen a tangible drop in terms of cases, yes.
And given that they are small numbers, I grant you, but those law enforcement numbers, had any of them attempted to contact the platform before they went to law enforcement, or did they all begin their journey through contacting a law enforcement agency, or are you aware of that data?
I'll need to come back to you on each of those 3 specific cases because some of them are ongoing, but let me come back to you on that one.
Thank you.
In most cases, as soon as the user contacts us, as long as we're able to identify the content and the creator in question, we're able to take it down. What happens sometimes is we get incomplete information. So someone may say, I think there's an image of me, and so we would need to go back to them and say, can you tell us who the creator is? Can you tell us anything about it that would help us to identify it? And then we're able to action it and take it down.
Thank you. I'd like to take you to the Reuters report that more than a dozen cases of NCII were reported to the police in the United States, which were filed last year. Now, of course, not everyone will go to the police, and I think that's reflected in the numbers that you said about UK-based law enforcement. But how many other cases are you aware of? And is this just the law enforcement numbers? Are they just the tip of the iceberg, in your view?
So the Reuters reports, was over an 8-year period in question. So, and actually the confirmed cases they came to OnlyFans with was over a 59-month period from January 2019 to November 2023. Of the number of cases they mentioned where they had seen OnlyFans being listed in the report, actually Reuters only approached us with 6 cases. In one of those cases, there was no OnlyFans account. So the point I mentioned earlier on about actually being able to identify whether there was a creator on the platform. In one case, there was no creator account. In the other 5 cases, we'd already taken down the content previously. So the Reuters information was, yes, it was NCII material. Yes, it appeared on OnlyFans, but we had identified it and taken it down, which is exactly what you should do.
And how quickly in those 5 cases were you able to do that? Was that another 24-hour situation, or did that take longer?
I need to come back to you with the details for some of those cases because it's different for each case, but it's as soon as we hear it, as David noted earlier on.
Did you want to come in on that, David?
Yeah, I'd just like to make sort of a contribution to that, to particularly about the Reuters report. So I happened to give an interview to the journalist as well about, there was all sorts of different questions connected to that as part of the investigation. And so I spent an hour explaining about Stop NCI and also and the work that's gone on with the different platforms, including OnlyFans. I also asked or suggested that readers of that article could well be victims, and it could well kind of draw victims, and it would be really important to include a link to Stop NCI or any other where a support is available if victims are affected by that report. And it was really disappointing, given the time that I contributed, that none of that was included in the particular report. So, like I say, it's not directly related to the question, but it's relevant.
It's helpful context.
Context, yes.
Dodgy journalism, who would have thought it? Never mind. That may well actually come into the second part of my question, but do tell me if I'm wrong. So, as part of that report, it was suggested that people inferred that it was still quite commonplace that people were managing to circumnavigate your consent checks. What would your take be on that? How robust do you feel they are? And if there are issues that are coming up in terms of getting around those consent checks, have you been able to identify how that has occurred and then put mechanisms in place to stop that from happening? Or is it not as big of an issue as the report might have suggested?
First of all, I would say that we will always strive to end up with 0 cases of NCII on our platform. That's the number we want to be saying is 0. So any one case is a serious case to us. So we investigate any report to understand whether somebody has circumvented our controls to be able to upload that content and, for example, make changes where necessary. That was part of the driver behind changing the consent policy to being proactive rather than reactive. It's again recognising actually that's a better way to protect people, is to expect that consent to be provided to OnlyFans in advance of material being posted on the platform. So we take every report very seriously. We look for opportunities to action it. And then you asked about, do we think our controls are robust? user-generated content platforms, all user-generated content platforms globally, every single social media platform, there's a risk of NCII being shared. What we have seen is that creating an environment whereby you know the age and identity of the people who are sharing information, you're able to attribute content to an individual, and you're able to provide actionable information to law enforcement or to help victims when they report it. Those are the steps that platforms can take to make it even more difficult for people. There will always be bad actors. Our job is to make it as hard as possible for them to act badly and to support victims. And one of the things that we do, as David noted, is actually when somebody reports to us that they believe they've been a victim of NCI on our platform or on any other platform, we will point them to victim support resources. So we will direct them to Stop NCI. We will direct them to the Revenge Porn Helpline, because we recognise, as Georgia mentioned earlier on, some of the challenges being faced by law enforcement to genuinely support victims in this area.
Thank you very much. And final question from me, Keely, is regarding Ofcom's investigation into concerns that children under the age of 18 have managed to get subscriptions to OnlyFans and obviously access some of the sexually explicit content that's on there. That was put down, I believe, to a coding error. How long did it take OnlyFans to identify the error which enabled that to happen? And what mechanisms were put in place to prevent a reoccurrence, essentially?
So I think in terms of the Ofcom investigation, obviously that's ongoing and don't want to prejudge the outcome of that. But I do want to provide some context for you in response to your question. So the investigation is regarding whether the measures that we had in place were sufficient, essentially, to prevent under 18s from accessing restricted content, including potentially explicit content. In terms of the measures that we had in place at the time, at all times we had in place a requirement for people to enter their full name, payment card, and also to complete an age assurance process. That age assurance process was always voluntarily set above 18 at all times during the relevant period. The coding error was in relation to 20 versus 23 in terms of the age it was set at. So at all times we had measures in place to try and prevent under 18s from accessing the platform. We're going to continue to work with Ofcom to help them to get to the bottom of obviously whether they're comfortable, whether 20 is an adequate solution. We believe that it is. In terms of the time it took to identify it, as soon as we identified it in early January. We then went to our tech team to confirm that there had been a misconfiguration at our end in relation to the age assurance software, coding it at 20, let's be clear, never under 18. And then we immediately, once we'd confirmed that, we picked up the phone to Ofcom and we said, hey guys, we need to tell you something. And then we followed up in writing with them afterwards. So we'll continue to work with Ofcom to give them the confidence in our age assurance measures that we have.
Thank you both very much for your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Keely, would it give you a further layer of assurance if you required, instead of a payment card, a debit card, a credit card that you can't get unless you're over 18?
It's a really great question, actually, because it's one that we've grappled with as well. So minors can get credit cards under their parents' names, so it wouldn't necessarily prevent the issue. I think having age assurance in place in the UK certainly helps in terms of that additional level of requirement. I think also, having the paywall in place in the first place definitely assists. So anything that we can do to close the gap is good.
Thank you. David, can I just ask you about the Revenge Porn Helpline? How's it funded?
So it's funded. We have some contributions from the Home Office, from the Scottish Government, which provides some contribution. Other than that, it's funded from our charitable reserves.
Are any of the platforms helping to fund it?
So Stop NCII. We had a philanthropic donation that was made to help us support and establish that. On an ongoing basis, we're anticipating that platforms will contribute into the operational costs of that. That's a different question to Revenge Porn Helpline, but no, there's no contributions to Revenge Porn Helpline.
And when you say you anticipate that the platforms are going to help contribute to ncii.org, how confident are you in that anticipation?
Well, without the funding for it, it won't exist. So I am confident about it.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Thank you. And maybe staying with you, David, and taking you back to some of the things that you were outlining for us earlier about the different kinds of images, not always the obvious. I wonder what extent you think that non-consensual images which are not sexual but might be culturally insensitive are a concern, and how well do you think that kind of concern is able to be dealt with at the moment?
So it comes back exactly to that point around intimate images are not necessarily sexually explicit. And during building Stop NCI, we spent a huge amount of time determining the language and the terminology, and we arrived at non-consensual intimate image abuse. So globally, StopNCI.org works with currently 94 NGOs around the world. So clearly the Revenge Porn Helpline supports victims, adults in the UK. We have limited capacity. And so what we will do is we partner with these 94 NGOs. There are very few, I think there are 5 around the world like the Revenge Porn Helpline. Some of the 89 around the world often do other things. So they may well support children. And it's those NGOs that report to us about exactly predominantly these sorts of issues. So yes, we see it in the UK, but if I think about Wright in India, so the NGO that we direct, we cross-refer in terms of Stop NCI, so they promote Stop NCI, and we then direct, where a victim arrives at StopNCI.org, we'll direct them back to their national support opportunity. I was going to say service, depending on whatever it is. And so countries, for example, like India, and many others, where exactly this is an issue, where based on culture, based on religion, so just merely being photoed or taken in an image with somebody, with your arm around somebody, has catastrophic implications for them. So that's why we refer to non-consensual intimate image abuse, not non-consensual sexual image abuse.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Is there anything you would want to add to that, Keily, from your end?
Well, I think that the point that David makes is a thoroughly excellent one, and shows the lack of understanding by some of the other platforms that David referred to earlier on, where they are simply talking about preventing nudity. It's about lack of understanding about intimacy in different social contexts. And that's why, for us, the key issue is consent. Right? The people featured in the image have to consent to being in the image. And so if somebody raises to us a picture of them entirely fully clothed but in a compromising position culturally, or, for example, maybe not wearing a hijab or something along those lines, we would absolutely take that image down. It doesn't need to be sexual in nature for us to act.
Can I just add on as well? And it's not directly related to this, but it reminded me about comments about the police. So I hear what Georgia said about Essex Police, and that's wonderful. It's great that she had that experience. That is not generally our experience in terms of the victims that we support from the Revenge Porn Helpline perspective. We do spend a lot of time coaching victims who have contacted the police and reminding them that yes, you are a victim of a crime. You need to go back and you need to report this. This is how you do it, which is frustrating that we have to expend time doing that. So, like I say, it's not directly related to that, but it was a prompt.
I think it's a point that was probably very well made at this point in the proceedings. So, thank you for that, and thank you both.
Elliot, on that point.
Yeah, on that point, thank you. Sorry to drag it on, but the Victims and Prisoners Bill, which is going through Westminster at the moment, have you had any opportunity to review the mechanisms within that and whether or not that would help complement the work of the Online Safety Act to try and help victims navigate the process? So we've had a lot of debate around IDVAs and ISVAs, the independent advisors. It doesn't sound to me though that they would be any use or apply necessarily in cases of NCII. So I just wondered if you had done any work with the Victims Bill to ascertain whether or not it would actually help in those instances where victims are struggling to navigate the process.
So have awareness that the Victims Bill is going through. It would be great to extend a conversation about, if there are some specific aspects that we could latch onto or we could contribute into there. That would be a great conversation to have.
Thank you, Chair.
David, you will know as well as I did that we invited Meta to come today. They refused to come. you'll know that we've written to a number of other platforms who have not yet graced us with a response. What message do you have to those platforms who are choosing not to engage? And is there anything more this committee can do to help them get to a more constructive relationship with you?
A wonderful question. So I would encourage all platforms to engage with Stop NCI. We've heard a great example here, as well as some implication in terms of engineering and legal lift in terms of integration. It's not a big thing, I would suggest. We've specifically gone about doing that to make it as easy as we possibly can for platforms. We are merely mirroring existing mechanisms. So we're using existing technologies, we're just applying it in this particular way. So the understanding the technical capabilities that platforms need, they already typically will have. So we're trying to make it as easy as we can. So it is about engagement and the letters that were written have been immensely helpful, and it seems that there needs to be more pressure that needs to be applied. Perhaps Ofcom may well be able to help too in terms of encouraging platforms to take the subject, or to take the hash list in recognition of the issues. We've heard this afternoon the impact of that, and we get to hear that impact every day with the Revenge Porn Helpline. The catastrophe that some people sadly find themselves in because of the result of this, it's through them and for them that platforms should do the right thing and engage with this particular process.
Thank you very much. Can I thank both of you? I think Keily made the point earlier that we shouldn't have to wait for legislation, that the platforms could be engaging now, couldn't they? But can I thank both of you for being here this afternoon? It's been incredibly helpful. If there is anything you wish to add in writing, then please do so. Order, order.
Proceeding has ended.